everyone, this is Amy.
I'm Paul.
And this is the Comics Haul. We've got a really cool
Ooh.
show for you guys this week with Doom Patrol. We have moderator Cassidy here in the chats. Cassidy, you want to say hi?
Hi. Yes, I'm moderating. We are live on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group. I am in all those chats watching for your comments and questions. And Paul is watching in the Instagram chats.
Woohoo! All right, so if you guys want to shout out, have a conversation with us, we're going to be checking in with Cassidy to round up the questions, so send them her way. And we're going to jump right in with this week's comic book news.
Yes.
We picked kind of a big three hitters for comic book news this week. So,
yes,
you want to get started?
So starting over, on the DC side, Legion of Superheroes number 8 and 9, written by Brian Michael Bendis. So that is going to be a story that we're going to start seeing unfold in mid-August to late September. Now, the Eisner Award-winning Michael Bendis, Brian Michael. We're on good terms, so I just call him Michael Bendis now. Brian Michael Bendis, he shared a poster filled with all the artists involved in their Trial of the Legion event that's going to be taking place in the issues 8 and 9. Now, all of the veteran artists attached to that it's insane. I didn't even get the entire list on there, but some of the folks that are going to be giving their talents to that book are Mike Allard, Sanford Green, Dan Jurgens, Jeff Lemire, Fabio Moon, Evan Doc Shaner, Liam Sharp, Nick Darrington, Gary Frank, Mitch Gerards, Tul Latay, Joe Prado, Joe Quinones, Ivan Reese, John Romita Jr., and Ryan Suk, who is the interior penciler for that series currently. So yeah, It's a lot of talent on that book.
I love when we get to do those artist lists. Speaking of talent and taking it to a different side of the comic book world other than just the writing and the artwork, Tom Brevoort has announced or revealed a comic book editorial simulation game. It is a tabletop RPG. It's part fantasy football, and he's going to be running it on his blog, which is tombrevoort.com. You guys can see the lineup of the players that will be playing, because there are actually people who have been chosen to play, and they will be updating weekly with their new moves and strategies. So I think it is a little bit closer to the fantasy football style. But in this game, 5 players will act as group editors. 3 of them at Marvel, including the Thor and Avengers family books, the Spider-Man family books, and Captain America, as well as 1 DC editor and 1 Image Comics editor. So you can tell that Brevoort works for Marvel, and he's got the home team playing. But the game, the role-playing game, is for them to successfully manage their titles commercially and critically, including through marketing initiatives, and ensuring that the simulated writers, turn in their work on time. This is a fascinating concept for an RPG. Who knows if the actual playing rules will be made available, but you can go to tombrevoort.com to check out this editorial simulation game as it progresses.
Yes, it's really cool. We're excited to see kind of what unfolds there. But in news that happened last week, but in respect to the incredible Denny O'Neil, we didn't want to cover any news. We wanted it to just be about him. We didn't cover it all, but DC Fandom, which is a 24-hour virtual event that will take place on August 22nd. This event is a virtual con that will explore every aspect of DC Comics, which includes video games, movies, television, I believe even some of their collectibles lines as well. It's going to be broken up into 5 distinct zones, with the Hall of Heroes serving almost as the epicenter, or like the lobby, if you will. The event will be available in multiple languages, including Chinese, Portuguese, German, and many more. I think there's 12 or 13 different languages that it's going to be available in. The 5 verses are going to be the Watchverse, the Uverse, Kidsverse, Insiderverse, and the Funverse. There's going to be tons of info about this, about Justice League, the Snyder Cut, Wonder Woman 84 exclusive footage, interviews, fan content displays. There are art giveaway. There are art contests, cosplay contests. It's going to be something like no other that I don't think anyone has done yet. But we'll see. It's going to be something that is incredible, and I expect all of you to be right there with us.
I think they have the advantage also that it's not timed with virtual Comic-Con at San Diego. So this is their own distinct August event. And you can catch me in the Funverse because I think I want to hang out there.
Yes.
And then, of course, the big news that we lined up our show with this week, we're going to take this time to kind of segue into the books we're discussing this week. Doom Patrol Season 2 is launching on HBO Max and DC Universe. So if you haven't caught up on the first season, I highly recommend you do so because there's an absolute romp. Doom Patrol are famously known as some of, not even just in the DC universe, but across all publishing, some of the most bizarre superheroes out there.
Yes.
Coincidentally, they did debut several months before the X-Men, and you know how publishing happens. So who knows how, if this was just divergent evolution of Marvel and DC both having their idea for a super team of people who society doesn't trust, led by a mysterious gentleman in a wheelchair, but technically Doom Patrol did it first. So we will be talking about one of the most definitive runs of Doom Patrol, written by Grant Morrison. And then we will be talking about the most recent run of Doom Patrol, written by Gerard Way, who was featured on our Umbrella Academy show.
Yes.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the books we read, we want to give you, never before seen on the Comics Hall, a brief art history lesson that'll help you understand a little bit about the bizarreness of the characters that Grant Morrison really set kind of the tone for all the following decades.
There will be a test. So
yeah, so take notes.
There is a test.
There will be, pop quiz. I was actually very excited because this is something I learned about in art history in college, and I started to recognize it and wasn't sure if I was just making connections that didn't exist, but it's very, very present in Grant Morrison's work. There's an artistic and intellectual movement called Dadaism, also known as Dada. You can even tell by the name, the way that it sounds, it's very bizarre. There's debates about how the art movement got its name. Some people said that it sounded like a child's word, and so they stuck with it. Some people said that one of the famous artists stuck a knife into a dictionary, and Dada is the French word for a hobby horse. And so they were like, yeah, we're going to go with that. But at the core of Dadaism is critique of capitalism, a disillusionment with the war, and these artists believe in nonsense and irrationality as the answer to modern society. The movement was a response to World War I, the first kind of global scale conflict of its nature that really just disillusioned people and freaked them out. And so they thought our only recourse to deal with this and express our true perception of the world is absolute nonsense, absolute chaos. Art that doesn't make sense, even so much so that it was called anti-art. Because it was against everything that traditional paintings and sculpture stood for. Right. I think it is amazing. If you see modern memes, modern internet memes, the way that they've become so bizarre, and it's colors and words and distortion, and you don't quite know what it means unless you just kind of feel it. I believe that memes are our modern version of Dada, but some of the famous forms of Dada include collage, which I think we get a nice example of with the Scissormen in Grant Morrison's work, as well as sound poetry, words, phrases that don't make sense necessarily, but the sound of reading them out loud causes some sort of mental reaction or image, and sculpture, but the sculpture in a way that was very unconventional. So that's kind of Dada in a nutshell. Grant Morrison really took these themes and ran with it, and created the Brotherhood of Dada, which were formerly the Brotherhood of Evil. Paul, do we want to
get into it now?
Yeah, I think we should just get into it. Some of the other stuff we can explain as it goes. But like, that's what you need to know, is that Dada is a response to modern society. It makes no sense because the artists believe that society makes no sense. And you can make art out of nonsense, which I think is the perfect encapsulation for the Doom Patrol, which is art and nonsense.
Something out of nothing, which is an incredible segue into Grant Morrison's iconic. I mean, when we say iconic, I mean, we really do mean his iconic run on Doom Patrol, which started in February of 1989. And that first arc, it was known at the title of it was Crawling Through the Wreckage. And of course, again, as mentioned, the writer on that is Grant Morrison. Now, the pencils did bounce around a bit between different issues. That's going to be Scott Hanna, Richard Case, and Doug Braithwaite. The inks are also handled by Scott Hanna and Richard Case. John Nimberg and Carlos Garcon help a little bit there. But yeah, this was a really interesting run in that I think this is volume 2 for the Doom Patrol. And if you aren't, I always say that volumes in comics are very, they're subjective. They aren't as objective as people want, really point them out to be. When we say volume 2, this is basically the second iteration of when this team got really, really picked back up and put into continuity. So you'll see, if you want to know how much time passed, when we talk a bit later about Gerard Way, that's technically volume 6. Lots happened in those.
Yeah, if I might add, the volume distinction is none other than usually when the company says we want to run a new number 1 because people like number 1. That's the starting point, but it might not necessarily be the exact new starting point, or it's in picking up from another story that finished off. But it's just, it represents a changing of the guard for either the characters or the creative team.
Right, and this particular run, it became from Change because this run followed a big DC event that was penned by Keith Giffen, and it was called Invasion, and the pencils on that were actually done by Todd McFarlane of Spawn fame. I don't think anyone's ever heard of Spawn, but if you've ever heard of Spawn, you should go check it out. It's pretty great. But this is this was before Spawn there, and it basically was a bunch of really civilized or technologically advanced and civilized alien races. They didn't believe that human beings really should be allowed to be this random, and they are. I'm really sorry. My dog just got back in from the groomer, so she's losing it. Sorry, guys. But so, anyways, all of these alien races, they fight Earth, and it's this big event called Invasion. And the only thing you really need to pull from that is that they dropped, as a last-ditch effort, this thing called the Gene Bomb, which basically was supposed to eradicate the meta gene, which we've seen on both sides of the Marvel and DC fence there, or eradicate it from folks. And from that, we actually get, all of the characters that Grant Morrison didn't want in his run, we get them removed. That includes Scott Fisher, that's Celsius, and we have Negative Woman. There's also another character named Lodestone, who we'll reference a little bit later. She actually falls into a coma. But with that, we get an introduction to, I think, a fan favorite character, one of the best characters, Crazy Jane. And I think maybe do you want to talk about kind of who she is and where she sort of came from in that?
Yeah, so Crazy Jane is actually, her name isn't Jane. Her name is Kay Chalice, and she's a woman who has 64 different personalities, each of which is imbued with a new metahuman power as a result of the gene bomb. They function in the underground, which is inside of her, basically her body, but it's a complex train system in which some of the personalities ride around endlessly. There's a personality who is the conductor. They are hiding from other personalities who get on and off at the different stops. And so she's kind of, if you're more familiar with Legion, which I think at this point, a lot of fans might be more familiar with him simply because he had a TV show first. But Crazy Jane is that equivalent, where she has the multiple personalities that each possess a power, and she's very respectful of her personalities. They obviously, there's some that are going to fight and butt heads, but she respects their right to existence. And so she represents this character who's kind of like a party bag of which of her personalities is going to be pulled out at any given time. Have we met all of her personalities, or are there some that are still in waiting? And she was introduced, I believe, in the second issue of Crawling from the Wreckage. And she's a staple of the Doom Patrol television series, which is interesting because she wasn't in the first iteration of the team, whereas Negative Man and Robot Man are classics. They just kind of got modern upgrades. And so, yeah, Grant Morrison introduced Crazy Jane, who is a staple of the team now. And he really also, as Paul mentioned, in removing certain players because of the gene bomb and choosing who he wanted to be on the team, he really set the stage for what is considered the new core version of the team, because the original core was Elastawoman or Elastigirl at that time, Negative Man, Robot Man, Mento, and then Beast Boy.
Right. And I think what was interesting is that Grant Morrison, like in the back of my head, I think he just knew, like he had this character, Kate Chalice, Crazy Jane. He had her, like I think just ready to go. And I think that's a big reason why when he took over the run, he didn't need all of those other characters, because he said basically, I have a fix-all for that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, while we've done quite a bit of setup for kind of getting into Grant Morrison and the high strangeness that's going to become, Crawling Through the Wreckage, maybe let's talk a little bit about like the story and tell you guys like why you should be reading this.
Yeah, so the story begins with and if you see from the cover of the first issue, you see a really tortured Robot Man who I think he's probably my favorite of the Doom Patrol, but he's absolutely being tortured by his past, by his accident that caused him to become nothing but a brain inside of a robot. And as we learn, all the characters are connected through Niles Calder, the chief, who's very mysterious and may or may not be responsible for the way that the Doom Patrol is today. Right. But the book opens on Cliff having a traumatic flashback, and we see that he and Larry Trainor are both recovering from the incidents of the gene bomb and just their adventures up to that point. And so they are crawling through the physical wreckage, but also through a lot of the mental struggle that they endured up to that point. Right. And so, yeah, the first issue is a lot of them kind of setting, it's Grant Morrison's, hey, here's the clean slate. I'm going to tell you who's in the hospital, who's not, who's out of commission. And then we're going to have them get out of this situation and slowly come back together as they have to face a bizarre but incredibly iconic threat in the Scissor Men, who actually take their scissor hands and excise people from the fabric of reality, like by just cutting them out, which is very Dada collage of them, because the cutting and removal of context from an image was very important to that art movement.
And what's interesting about the Scissormen specifically and the way Grant Morrison treats them is they are this, completely confusing villain until like they're this looming confusing villain until issue 3, because I was reading this comic and I didn't even understand what I didn't understand at certain points. Like I Amy had made a great point saying like, maybe I'm not meant to understand it, or maybe, maybe I'm just dumb and I'm not understanding some of these words. And I think we have some photos coming up, guys, of the Scissormen, but they do have, when they're introduced in issue 3, or the third comic in Crawling Through the Wreckage, they are it's really strange, like the way that they present themselves and the way that they exist in the world of Doom Patrol, it makes no sense. And I think it doesn't make sense to me until the last, the last half of the third issue of that. And then in 4, it becomes much more apparent. But like Amy said, it plays well into Dadaism.
Yeah, we actually have a page up right now where if you do read this as I did the first time, you read the words that they're saying and you want to make sense of them so badly. You're like,
Right.
I think I can understand. I think the words they're saying are kind of related to the situation, but it relates to the sound poetry of Dada, where it's words and things that don't go together. On this page that you're seeing as they're shooting down Negative Man in the kind of the anti-reality realm that they send people to once they've cut them out. They say defensibility in the flowery hiatus, brushing for abscized fever, virtuous deadfall. And they say deadfall when they hit Negative Man. And so you're thinking, oh, okay, they've deadfall, they've hit their target. But the rest of those words mean absolutely nothing in the context, but they sound very beautiful, like defensibility in the flowery hiatus. It's not necessarily meant to have a literal context on the page.
Right.
My favorite is when they're introduced in issue 20 and they say, thirdly, be grimmer as fond brevities, aider with alder and ere thism safer. You're like, when they say as fond brevities, you're like, oh, okay, I think they're introducing themselves, but you're not really sure because it makes a confusing poem of the language, which I think Grant Morrison does in a brilliant but also extremely frustrating way. It's a fun experience to read, but I will be quite honest, both sets of Doom Patrol comics we read fried my brain until I had a chance to think about it and maybe reread certain passages, because they do push the limits of that weirdness and what your brain is willing to jump to understand what goes on in the story.
Yeah, you almost have to suspend your belief of a lot of what you know of comics. I had never read Grant Morrison's run, or at least not in order coming into this. So when I read Crawling Through the Wreckage, like I'm sitting on, knowledge of all of these other comics that I've read and how my brain thinks they should go. And this comic says, oh, that's adorable, but this is how this comic book is going to go. And that is entirely prevalent as to what the Doom Patrol are. In and of themselves, they make no sense. They should not work as a team. They shouldn't, because they're all just so strange. Technically, Crazy Jane could probably do all of this herself, but they all have this particular role that they play in this that allows not only a power balance as far as the pow and the wham parts, but an emotional balance that they all require. Because I think that's something that's so great about these characters is they are so deeply flawed, and that's something that Grant Morrison writes so well.
Well, and I think the fun part about this opening salvo from Grant Morrison for the 4 issues of Wreckage is that the final battle is solved with logic, and it's logic that, again, you go, I'm pretty sure I understand how this works. Negative Man has to, it's basically the 2 doormen where it's like one is a liar and one will tell the truth.
Right. And
he out logics the kind of priests of this bizarre realm, and then everything goes back to normal. And then they're debriefing with Niles Calder, explaining like, so then Negative Man said this, and of course the world went back to normal because of this strange plot hole in the world's logic, which again, it embraces the chaos. But I do love the how the debriefing segment was so like, yeah, obviously this was the answer. Like it makes perfect sense. And you're sitting there as the reader, and kudos to you if you absolutely followed every bit of logic, but mostly as the reader, you're sitting there going, is that what that was? Okay. So you just throw convention out the window. I mean,
we still want to talk about Brick by Brick by Gerard Way, but before we wrap up on this, there's even a bit in this, Amy, and I'm sure you obviously read it, I hope, because we're talking about this live and for all these people, but everyone else, there's the whole bit where Crazy Jane brings one of her personalities forward, and she is it Mother Madness, Mother Darkness? But she's the one that speaks all of these ancient languages, and it's this book, basically, that was completely dreamt of, completely thought of, and it has no page. I mean, it has no words. And then Niles Calder and everyone in this comic is sort of like, oh, okay, obviously. Okay, so we'll just do this and this, and everyone but Cliff Steele. So that's why I think Cliff Steele is such an important character in the foundation of Doom Patrol, because he is easily the most relatable to the reader, as you know, because he's living in this strangeness, and you're like, all right, well, if I can understand one thing, I can understand that at least Cliff Steele is as confused as I am.
Yes, I do love that bit at the end where they all are deciding to be the new team, and you get that kind of like
Right.
team huddle handshake, which also very nicely illustrates that each character like kind of is represented by one of the primary or secondary colors.
Right.
But he says anything to avoid having a quiet life. I mean, this is a man who's lost everything except for the brain that he is.
Oh,
he doesn't have
there
a
we go.
sense of feeling. There's them with the chief ultimately deciding to be the team. To go back to your question, it was Mama Pentecost is one of
Mama
her.
Pentecost.
Mama Pentecost. Yeah, she has so many different personalities. But yeah, I think, and what I think I love is that even though he is so completely removed from what he used to be as a human, I think Cliff Steele is arguably one of the most human characters, even in the brief time I've spent watching Doom Patrol season 1. I'm not quite finished, so no spoilers. He's just a brain in a jar trying to get back to what it was that made living so special.
Aren't we all?
Man,
We're just
but
all
I
brains in
love
jars.
him. And he's consistent too. I actually, my first interaction with the Doom Patrol was in the Teen Titans classic cartoon series with the version of Mento and Beast Boy who were on the team.
Right.
And he was always the character who kind of stuck up for Beast Boy, who was being badly treated by Mento, who was their leader. And yeah, I think of all the struggles that all the characters have. I mean, in this Grant Morrison version of Negative Man is actually a being in triplicate. It's the negative spirit, Larry Trainer, and his doctor, his female doctor, who all got pulled into one being, who insists that they're called Rebus. But this will change over time. Usually the negative spirit gets back to just being with Larry Trainer. But you've got a woman with 64 personalities, you've got a brain in a jar, and you've got 3 people wrapped up in bandages as one person. It's if you're thinking that you're going to get any straight story out of any of that, then you're already mistaken. And so Grant Morrison writes for the people who want the weird and who want the story that doesn't necessarily reach a linear conclusion. Which I think expecting a linear conclusion out of any Doom Patrol book is a misguided attempt. Even with what I saw with Gerard Way and knowing what he did with Umbrella Academy. Seeing the ways in which he expanded some of the lore of Doom Patrol and then left me utterly confused about other elements, just kind of really speaks to the nature of this team. And it's not a cut and dry superhero book, which I think is important to have in the landscape. It almost feels like it doesn't belong as your typical big 2 DC Marvel type story. It's so beyond that.
And I think, while we transition now into Brick by Brick by Gerard Way and Darrington, the thing that the Doom Patrol captures so well, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is sort of immersing these characters in a relatable world and then making things that as relatable completely unrelatable by the end of the issue or the end of the arc. Because as we'll segue, before we segue now into there, you'll start seeing. But I'll never look at an ambulance the same way again. But before we do that, Cassidy, our fearless moderator, do you have any updates, any questions from anyone about Grant Morrison? I know we kind of went through a lot there.
Have we totally lost everybody?
Actually, there are some people in the chats who are keeping up and who are really enjoying this. Scott on Facebook has been talking about Crazy Jane and how she is actually based off of a woman with dissociative identity disorder, the late author Trudy Chase, who she was known for her book When Rabbit Howls. So I think it really touches on, how are you talking about Grant Morrison writes for the strange, just good stuff. And then Sean Mahmood on the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group let everyone know that he went to his comic shop for the first time today in months. So that was pretty exciting.
That
Yes.
is exciting. Sean, let us know what you picked up. I
Yeah.
already know what's on my list. I'm going in
Same.
on Friday to get my books because I like to give people some space because I know we're still keeping it safe. But I know that there's more Thor today. I'm very excited about that. More Ludocrats. If you like the strange and you're looking for other books that are the
Geez,
kind of
Ludicrous.
bizarre logic, I think Paul and I have to talk about this, but maybe we can hold us to it if we say it here. I want to go next week over some of the big releases that people might have missed now that stores are starting to open back up. And Ludocrats is one of those ones where you just kind of have to nod and say yes and accept the logic. But yeah, let us know what you picked up because it's nice to see that the stores, even though they have the publishers have reevaluated their lines and are spacing out their releases more, we're starting to get back to the big stories that were left hanging before March.
Yep. Go if you can go buy. If you can safely and responsibly, please go to your local comic book shop and go pick up your books. There are a ton of different books that are out there. I think me and Amy will cover separately on our social channels. We've it's been so crazy the world itself has been nuts. But we'll definitely start getting back to putting up some of our reviews as well, our AIM reviews. And yeah, maybe next week. I think we've decided now. Next week we'll start talking about some of the books like Decorum, Adventure Men, all of these other books that have come out. And of course we'll talk, or maybe I might just talk about it because I am like obsessed with Batman right now. But and everything Tinian is doing. But we will get into all of that next week.
Ooh, that's the hook to get you back after we completely lose you in our Dadaist discussion here.
And so now we're going to transition over into before we move on, Scott from Facebook is excited for Immortal Hulk. Everyone, man, that book is great. Al Ewing, I don't know when he sleeps.
I'm sad that he jumped off the Valkyrie book, but I mean, Jason Aaron and Torrin Groenbeck have been doing an amazing job. But Al Ewing came up with the vernacular for Mr. Horse, and he's the best new Marvel Comics character in a while. But yeah, I'm excited for the Immortal She-Hulk one shot that they announced as well out of Empire. So that's cool.
That's going to be great. Yeah, I think Al Ewing's probably realizing now, like I'm going to write Empire. That's still happening. Okay, so let me start doing that. But speaking of Brick by Brick by Gerard Way, like that segue. So this is, another really fascinating, I guess, adventure that came out of the Doom Patrol. And before we kind of get into that, I mean, obviously, it was written by Gerard Way, pencils by Nick Darrington, and colors by the ever fantastic Tamara Bonvillain, who has the coolest last name. I've said that on our show a couple times.
Villain, but it's Bonvillain.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Chris.
Close.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Love me some Robot Man. I may or may not have been biased in choosing the covers. Just to give you guys a little bit of backstory, though, you'll notice on this cover, and we'll mention it during the show, DC's Young Animal. This was a imprint, kind of like the modern cousin of Vertigo. Rest in peace, Vertigo. But in 2016, when DC announced their Rebirth event, and they were kind of really gearing towards making everything accessible for new readers, they collaborated with Gerard Way for this pop-up imprint, Young Animal, which I think it's kind of slowed down these days. I know that Far Sector is being published under the Young Animal label, but I think a lot of their line has kind of slowed. But Young Animal launched with Doom Patrol. It launched with Mother Panic by Jody Hauser. And it really was the new kind of crazy story. And Paul, you want to explain what we're looking at here?
Ooh, yeah, this is the universe, but seen through the eyes of a Euro. So, this actually, I was very confused when I read, when I saw just the cover. I was like, okay, Gerard Way, I'm hooked, and I don't know why.
I'm hungry, and I know exactly why.
But yeah, there is, in the first issue of Brick by Brick, this is it's going to be Doom Patrol, DC's Young Animal #1 that we're looking at there. That's just the galaxy when you rip the when you rip the the euro
Yes.
off.
So the special gimmick was that this was a sticker on the cover of your comic, and if you could stand to gently peel off a piece of your own comic book, you would be treated to the fact that the euro is actually an entire universe, which is explained within the story. But yeah, that was a cool gimmick cover. I don't think I've ever seen a peel off sticker cover before.
Yeah, and this book starts with it's this weird sort of story where you kind of see Cliff Steele in this. You're kind of just thrown into this initially, and then shenanigans ensue. A trash can blows up where there is a euro, and Cliff Steele is no longer in the euro anymore. And again, I read the first issue twice, and there's still things about it I don't understand, which I think is part of the brilliance of the writing, because I drew a lot of conclusions myself personally, and I was very careful to not go online and see like what everyone else thought. I didn't want to kind of jump into like a hive mind of like, I don't want my thoughts sort of swayed by anyone else. But yeah, I mean, this follows the story, and we'll kind of bounce. Me and Amy will bounce back. Amy is much better with explaining the stories to everyone. I am not nearly as eloquent I don't make words as goodly as Amy does. But yeah, it follows the story of a new character, Casey Brink, who is a EMT. She's an EMT, and she has a partner. He's her, they drive together, and that's Ricardo. Now, do we just tell people right up top, like spoilers? I mean, there's some of this we're gonna have to spoil everyone. I mean,
we're gonna have to give you a spoiler. So 3, 2, 1, spoilers are happening now.
Yes. So really quickly, you learn to understand that Casey Brink, she is a sentient comic book character created by Danny the Brick, also known as Danny Land. Danny is an interesting character to explain, but I do think, Amy, you had actually a really cool, I didn't know this about where kind of the origin of the Danny character comes from.
Yes. So if you've seen the show at all, or are familiar in the least bit with the Grant Morrison run, which again lays the brickwork, if I may, for Brick by Brick. Danny the Street is a genderqueer, sentient, teleporting space of existence that takes the form of a street, but also takes the form of a brick, also takes the form of an ambulance, and an entire Disneyland type fantasy. Danny the Street is another one of Morrison's bizarre characters. Yes, on the screen right now, you can actually see Casey is inside of Dannyland getting an explanation from Danny about the Doom Patrol, and you can see little puppets of the new version of the team with Crazy Jane and Robot Man, the classic version with Elasti-Woman and Beast Boy. You see the Scissor Men, and then in the final thing, you see the Brotherhood of Dada and their magical painting of Paris, which is a later Grant Morrison storyline. But Danny the Street actually was an homage to a famous drag queen whose name was Danny LaRue, and LaRue means street in French, I believe. And so this was just another one. And I can't say why Grant Morrison chose to create a street that can appear and make people and warp around. I have no explanation for that. You have to ask Mr. Morrison himself. But it's just another one of those characters that becomes a staple of the Doom Patrol for the strangeness and the potential of the character. Another one similarly is Flex Mentallo, the man of muscle mystery, who's one of my personal favorite characters, who also makes an appearance in Brick by Brick. But again, that's just one of those Grant Morrison characters who appears a lot because they are very versatile. Flex Mentallo can flex his muscles and change reality based on which muscle of his body he flexed. There's a very humorous incident in the television series, which I won't spoil for you, but yes, that did come from the Grant Morrison comics when he's trying to sneak into the Pentagon.
Because of course it did.
Because of course it did. Yeah, if you want to know what I'm talking about, I think if you just Google Flex Mentallo Doom Patrol, it will be one of the top Google results.
It'll be there, yeah.
But Danny the Street in this incident, excuse me, is a space. It is an existence. They are a being, a sentient being, but they can create other sentient beings. And one of those
Right.
is Casey Brink, who has managed to wander outside of Danny and have her own life.
Right. And we are initially I'd mentioned right before we jumped into this that I can't look at an ambulance the same way, because we are initially introduced to Danny, in one way or another as an ambulance that Casey Brink was, and Ricardo, her partner, by partner, just her work partner. I believe they just have a super, like, just a cool friendship the whole time. That they are the EMT ambulance the ambulance, I'm sorry, that they drive constantly is Danny. And I don't know if it's,
You can actually see Danny in Paul's background right
yeah,
now.
I can. Oh, did I go the wrong way? There we go. There's Danny, and then you've got Casey Brink right there, right outside the shotgun door. That's it's absolutely a bizarre story. And I think the bizarre is something that, is needed in Doom Patrol. Oh, and we have an awesome graphic here.
Yeah, this kind of explains, first of all, Casey's
Right.
experience reckoning with the fact that when she learns that she is fictional and not real, but it also encapsulates the reader's experience up to that point. It's, of course, this is a parody of the famous Crisis cover in which Superman and Supergirl are on the cover, but this has been replaced with Casey and a clown of nondescript nature. And it says, "So I imagine at this point you're having some sort of existential crisis, and that's to be expected. But here's the thing." And then Danny continues, but it's very, very fun and self-aware segment within the Brick by Brick story, which ultimately, actually, Paul, I want to go back to the fact that this is Gerard Way. We already covered Umbrella Academy. We already covered how much he genuinely knows and loves and understands comics.
Mm-hmm.
Back in that show, we actually mentioned that Grant Morrison did the foreword to Umbrella Academy.
Right. Yeah. And he, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we,
yes.
just softballing it up to me. In the Umbrella Academy, when you actually read the trade, I don't believe it exists in the first issue, of course, but in the trade paperback, or however you read it, the collected version, I should say, there is a foreword by Grant Morrison, and it basically talks about his experience back in 2000, I think 6, 2007, because Umbrella Academy was 2008, correct?
I don't know the exact date, but I will pull that for us.
Well, since we are on air, and luckily this isn't being recorded, right?
For Doom Patrol today.
I know, me too. My Umbrella Academy seems like years ago. But so whenever that had come out, Grant Morrison and Gerard Way just went out and just had coffee and just hung out. And Gerard Way, it was 2008. So Gerard Way and Grant Morrison, they were just talking about Umbrella Academy and these characters. And Grant Morrison, he basically just says how incredible it was that Gerard Way had this love for the characters that he created, that he had obsessed over, and he had an answer for everything. All he did was talk about these characters and their backstories, their families' backstories, and he just, like I said, he had an answer for everything. And that really shines through in Brick by Brick. I didn't even put it together until literally right before the show. I was like, oh, Grant Morrison did that forward on Umbrella Academy, and we're doing Grant Morrison first, and then we're doing Gerard Way. It's funny, that you can see the love for the characters that Grant Morrison really poured his heart into.
Yeah, and there's that idea of the respect and building off of what Grant Morrison set down before. I mean, we do see a lot of the kind of classic versions of these characters, and we kind of get back to form with Crazy Jane and Negative Man. But you also see Gerard Way getting to put his own spin on things. I mean, Dannyland is an exceptional example. Another example is when we get Terry Nunn. Terry Nunn is another character who Casey Brink and Terry Nunn are the biggest new characters in this run. And there's a fun reference. We actually don't get any answers as to who Terry Nunn is. Volumes 1 and 2 of Doom Patrol by Gerard Way kind of make one giant story, but you can read the first 6 issues
Right.
for a semi-complete story. But you get a hint at who Terry Nunn is when she's reading a book that I was actually very excited. I did a double take. This was before I went and confirmed that Grant Morrison had in fact done a bunch of Dada work into the later issues of his Doom Patrol run that we didn't read. But this is Terry. Terry is reading a book by Hannah Hook, who is one of the famous Dada artists. She was a collage artist. She had a very, very famous, extremely long titled collage art called something like Cut with the Kitchen Knife Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Epic in Germany. And so you get this sense that she's somehow tied to maybe the Brotherhood of Dada, and we get to find out more. I won't spoil it, but there are ties to Terry and the Brotherhood of Dada, which was really cool. It was a really nice little hint that Nick Darrington put into the line art, and I'm sure Gerard Way, being who he is, specifically requested that. But that is a panel that ends an issue, and it felt really cool to see. And throughout all of that, I know we want to also really quickly highlight Tamara Bonvillain on colors.
Yes.
We pulled a couple of panels that just are her exceptional color work. This is negative. Oh, this one's crazy, but this is Negative Man merging with the Negative Spirit. So you see Larry Trainor on the far right, the disfigured man. Right. You see the Larry Trainor who is empowered, and then you see the Negative Spirit itself. But just like how many colors run through that image. Tamara Bonvillain has also been seen on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Angel Catbird by Margaret Atwood, who, yes, Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood did a graphic novel. I am a huge fan of Tamara's colors. She does. Wow. You can recognize her colors on any book, and yeah. I don't have the correct language necessarily to describe the quality of her colors, but it's amazing. It's perfect for this book. It adds a vibrancy that wasn't present necessarily in as much of the Grant Morrison run, just due to the limitations of the coloring skill at the time, which isn't to say that that colorists weren't skilled back then, but the access to digital colors and digital artwork.
Maybe the technology wasn't there for what Tamara can do now.
Yes, but that's one of the biggest highlights that I think enhances the weirdness of the story, and the artwork is just that fanciful, insane coloration. And
it's so interesting, specifically with a lot of, I felt her coloring in that, like, so, in how she chose to use colors, especially for me, because I specifically picked that photo of when the Negative Spirit comes to visit Larry Trainor. It's just, the depth that you can see that she didn't pencil it, but, the shadow and some of the inclusion in the buildings behind, and that Negative Spirit, like just the blacks that she used to show that, it just takes up that panel for me, and my eye is just drawn there. And you can very clearly see Larry Trainor, you can see Cliff Steele, Robot Man, but just something about the way that whole panel was colored to me just like struck out, or lack of color, if you will, because it's black, and it's incredible.
Yeah, I think Brick by Brick is what happens with the most modern version of a bizarre superhero team, and every creator is firing on all cylinders, which again is not to say that Grant Morrison's run was not of that caliber as well, but you can even tell in the art quality based on the 70s and 80s style of inking and coloring versus the modern style. Gerard Way turns the Doom Patrol into a kind of candy-coated psycho romp, which is really fun. And for those of you who are like, what the heck is that story, Brick by Brick, even about? Firstly, we get Casey Brink, we get her reckoning with her actual reality, but we also get the meat of the plot, if you will, is that this alien agency called the Vectra has infiltrated Danny the Ambulance and is causing him to, or forcing him to create people that they can grind up as food. And that
Right.
plot line gets a little lost, but it's the undercurrent. But unfortunately, I wish we had a chance, or maybe the foresight, to read the entirety of Morrison or of Gerard Way's Doom Patrol run, because a lot of the plot threads don't resolve in that first 6 issues. But that is what DC Universe recommended to us if we wanted to jump in on the Gerard Way stuff. But again, this is one of the most mind-blowing superhero teams in more ways than one.
Oh yeah, easily.
Vastly confusing. I love that it has its roots in an artistic movement, but the fact that it's an artistic movement that is, we embrace chaos, life has no meaning, everything that you understand about capitalist society doesn't apply here. You're in for an experience. And again, we always try to pick books that are experiences to read, but man, Doom Patrol, that's gonna stick with you.
And I think as far as actually reading these books, again, go to your local comic book shop. They're bound to have at least hopefully one of these. If not, I'm sure you can order them. Also, we both read these on the DC Universe app. Yes. You can read both, arcs, really. You can actually read all 12 issues of this. I recommend, just for the sake of sort of understanding stuff when you get to Gerard Way's run, read Grant Morrison's run first and then read Gerard Way, because there are a lot of homages and nods to Morrison's run.
Yes, and particularly odd with the DC Universe app, for Crawling Through the Wreckage, we read issues, I believe it was 19, 20, 21, 22. It was a 4-issue arc, because when you look at the cover for Crawling Through the Wreckage, it says 1 of 4. DC Universe gives it to you as a 7-issue story, which is not necessarily the case. But even if you're just watching the television show, Grant Morrison's version of the team is so definitive. The version on the television series has never existed the way that it does. Elastawoman is usually with Larry Trainor and Robot Man, but she's rarely been on the same team as Crazy Jane. They've never been on the same team as Cyborg. But Grant Morrison's story, with the introduction of Mr. Nobody and the prevalence of Crazy Jane, will really kind of set you up to understand the series better. And I loved it because the first issue follows the playbook of Crawling Through the Wreckage, with the characters having flashbacks. There's a really cool moment of Crazy Jane painting in the rain that is actually taken directly from one of those panels. And so if you're interested in the TV show at all, just be prepared for a wild ride, because again, it's something out of nothing, and it's embracing chaos, but that's the very nature of the Doom Patrol team.
Yes, embrace the weird and embrace the chaos.
So before we wrap it up, we're going to check in with Cassidy, see if you guys had any more questions, comments, concerns, Dadaist theories of your own. But we asked the Facebook group a question about Doom Patrol a couple weeks ago, so we're gonna take some time to go over that real quick before we wrap up. But Cassidy, what you got?
Yeah, so we got a response from Sean in the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group, who said that he picked up about a month or so of comics when he went to the comic store. And then aside from that, just mostly browsed. And I got a response from someone in that same group about what they're reading. Cody, she told me that she's about to head out and pick up this week's haul. So that's good. We got someone else going to a comic book store. And she's heading out to get Clone Wars Adventures.
Oh, fun.
Oh, okay.
That is an IDW series, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, I really like what IDW does with the Marvel and Star Wars licenses, and I'm always of the mind that all the comics are good comics, and more comics is always good. So it's nice to see that Marvel's Star Wars and superheroes have a slightly different tone than the IDW. So I think those help reach a greater audience. Hey, also gonna give a shout out. Primer came out this week. I think some stores got it early last week, but Primer is officially out as of this week. So if you checked out our show with Jen Miro, you can learn a little bit more about that. But go pick up Primer. We're going to probably talk about that soon, if not in the next week's show where it's the things you've missed. Maybe we'll do a whole show about Primer. we'll have to
see.
figure that out. But definitely wanted to give a shout out to that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm seeing. I also we got a question. Yeah, Cassidy, you want to run that one by us?
Yeah,
Okay.
so Scott on Facebook also wanted to know if you have checked out Grant Morrison's Animal Man.
I have not.
I've read some of it. I know I've read, if as far as Animal Man goes, what I've read the most of is Jeff Lemire's run. But Grant Morrison's run really, again, as he does with so many things, set the groundwork for things that people built on top of the Animal Man lore. And I mean, it's a great character. It's a great run. That actually reminded me, I actually do own that omnibus, the Morrison Animal Man. Now I'm gonna read it. Thank you.
I will have to check it out on DC Universe. Again,
Yeah.
for those of you who may be newer, and this is a hard distinction since we're not showing our poll lists regularly. I'm a lot more Marvel. I've been very grateful to have more time to dive into DC, especially on the DC Universe app. But I do have some significant gaps in my DC knowledge. If it's not Teen Titans or Supergirl, it's probably a little lacking. So I will definitely check out Animal Man. I was very impressed by Morrison's Doom Patrol. And I know that Animal Man comes up a lot lately in reference to Swamp Thing once they added the green and the red. So I will have to check that out.
Definitely. Please.
Yeah. But a couple weeks ago, we did ask on the Facebook group, like, who has the weirdest powers in the Doom Patrol, if anyone had any favorites. We were not sure how familiar people were with the team. But Paul, I think we kind of had like an overwhelming in one favor response.
With resounding results, it was Crazy Jane. Everyone seems to love her. I mean, that's also my favorite character in the Doom Patrol. She's so fascinating, and I think it's because if I did my research correctly, they've really only shown about 20 of her personalities. We've still not seen all of them. So, and I think that's definitely on purpose, because Morrison, he didn't want to, he's like, well, I've still got 44 other personalities just in case I need them. So I totally make sense as to why everyone really, really loved, Kate Chalice, Crazy Jane.
Yeah, I gotta say, coming from my perspective of only remembering them from the Teen Titans show, where they were much more put together on that show. I think Teen Titans was very generous to how well they. But I also think before Morrison hit, I think the team was a little more put together. They were still ostracized and considered very weird, but I think they didn't have as much of the internal strife as they do now. I loved Robot Man. Watching the show, I love Robot Man so much. I think just hearing Brendan Fraser say "what the F" in surprise, in total exhaustion every time when something weird happens. Because again, he's so desperately trying to get back to what it means to be human, but he's got all his teammates going crazy. But I deeply love Crazy Jane, especially on the show.
Diana Guerra.
Yeah, she's a revelation, and reading what I did of Grant Morrison's run, I was very fascinated. She gave me some Sandman vibes, the death and delirium, who are my favorite of the Endless. So I totally vibe with Crazy Jane. I appreciate what she brings to the universe. But yeah, I gotta give it up to Robot Man, just being so tired all the time. Because I too feel like a brain in a jar some days.
Yes, sounds like a scrapped Katy Perry lyric. All right, thank you guys.
I think that's about all we could try to comprehend and explain about the Doom Patrol.
Yeah, so now we're gonna go to intermission. Everyone get some water, and we're gonna finish talking about issue 2. No, I'm just kidding, everyone.
Oh my god!
Thank you all so very much for hanging out and sticking it out with us, and talking all things Doom Patrol. Remember, season 2 comes out tomorrow on HBO Max and on the DC Universe app.
So you have one night to catch up on all of the 13, 14, 15 other episodes. It's fine. You can do it.
Yeah,
right now.
That's 14 hours. There's 24 hours in a day. What are you doing? Right after the show, start. Oh, geez.
Good stuff. Yeah, thank you guys so much for sticking with us. We'll see you guys next week on our show where we're probably going to definitely cover everything that has been a big release since
Yes.
the publishing kind of was a little topsy-turvy. Come with your best recommendations and shout-outs because there might be stuff that even we missed.
Yes.
But until then, I'm Amy.
I'm Paul.
And this has been the Comics Hall. Thank you for joining us.
Bye,
Oh, my
guys.
hand disappeared.